This is episode 7 of the Operation Paragon podcast, and I'm your host, Gabriel Schickler. Today we are joined by Joe Gillespie, who is the owner of Write and Lift on Instagram. He is a father, works in marketing for personal brands through Launch Socials, and he also writes extensively on his account to explore both human nature and life as a whole. Today we discuss how a writing discipline can benefit you, how to find a path that plays to your strengths, if the modern education system can be salvaged, and if so, how, the fragmentation of American culture and what we can do about it, how and why to create beauty in your life, and much more. One of the things that I really appreciate about your page is that it's, I think saying more than one dimensional is selling it a bit short, because you cover everything, man. You've got kind of the mindset, the personal development stuff, but it's all bound together in a very real way, where first, I can tell just by the way you have your slides set up and everything in the carousel posts you do, you're not just doing little platitudes to get something out there. You're writing about things that genuinely interest you, and then not just talking about them, but actually providing a practical application for, taking that philosophy into your life. And so when I was looking over your page and considering what I wanted to really talk about, my mind went a ton of different directions, and there's a lot of different things that we could go over. But the first thing that, or not the first thing, but I guess the final thing that I really decided on to start out was that highlight that you have saved for your story specifically. You talk about how you've tried all sorts of things. You did, I think you were like a full-time musician. You did bartending. You taught at it was a middle school or a high school.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did some student teaching and at an outdoor school. Yeah.
Yeah, and all these different things. And then you finally found a path that kind of suits you and the direction you want your life to go, your skills, everything like that. And there are a few things that I want to break down here, but
sure.
For the audience, the first thing that I want to know is what recommendations you would have for finding, as you say, the intersection of your passion and your skill set, because that's something that I personally am kind of toying with right now, and I'm sure many other people are as well.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, really, like to distill it, I mean, obviously there's more to it, right? But it
Yeah, of course.
essentially comes down to trying a bunch of different stuff. And that is something that, I think especially like I'm 32, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I know a lot of young guys specifically, and a lot of young people in general, they um they're very influenced by maybe it's expectations of their family.
Mm-hmm.
They might have like they might not just be listening to themselves, right? Like I've always been a really creative person, and I kind of thought like, well, this is like what God gave me.
Mm-hmm.
I've never really been someone, I knew I wasn't going to go into accounting or anything like that, or like rebuilding cars. Like that was never really like my interest. And so,
Mm-hmm.
developing that at a younger age, I kind of just came to this point where, I knew that I had to give the creative thing a shot, whatever that looked like,
Mm-hmm.
in order to really like be able to put my head on the pillow at the end of the night and be okay with who I was. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I knew that that required that path, at least in my early 20s and like, 19, late teenage years, that required doing things that a lot of other people weren't doing and not expecting to get the same results that other people were getting, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
Um,
so you're not playing the comparison game.
yeah, I wasn't playing the comparison game. And like, again, like with music, because that really was pretty much from the time I graduated high school to about 26, 25 or 26.
Wow.
That was really, I mean, I had odd jobs. Like I was interested in
Mm-hmm.
other things, but I was in a few really serious bands. We toured a lot in California. I started touring with other bands nationally for a good 2 years. Have recorded on probably, put out 2 solo albums myself and recorded on probably, I don't know, 15 or 16 other records.
Wow.
And yeah, to me it was a combination. Like what led me out of that was kind of, again, just as I did in like at the end of high school, thinking like, okay, well, eventually I want a family, eventually I want these
Mm-hmm.
things, but right now I want to listen to this part of me this calling that I have. And kind of what led me out was having that same conversation again when I was, 25, 26, and thinking,
Mm-hmm.
okay, especially when I was touring, I was seeing a lot of guys who were, I mean, it was just the industry was changing, so
Mm-hmm.
music at that time, everything was going digital. It was like, the late,
Oh yeah.
middle 2010s and stuff. And,
Mm-hmm.
um, you know, bands that we were opening up for, playing for 1,000, 2,000 people, these guys were making less than like a Starbucks barista, and they never saw their families. They were always on the road.
Mm-hmm.
It was just, and I thought, okay, well, I can still do the creative thing, but in terms of like my financial prospects and like I didn't want to give that life to
Mm-hmm.
like my future kid and my wife, and stuff. And so then it was just, again, going back to the drawing board, like, okay, well, I've always liked to write. I've always liked to write music. So eventually decided I wanted to go into teaching, got my degree.
Mm-hmm.
Things at that point were starting to pivot very, the college experience, I was older, and it
Yeah.
was very left. It was like, it was just the woke stuff has started to kind of take off. And
Mm-hmm.
again, I kind of saw that writing on the wall, which was everything happens for a reason. And I did a little teaching, eventually went into journalism, to use my English degree. Same exact thing that happened
Mm.
in terms of the ideological component. And eventually I fell into marketing and have been doing that for, the last 3 years, and I love it. But,
Mm-hmm.
I think the thing that I would suggest and that has helped me is just like writing down, like being really aware of who you are. What are you
Mm-hmm.
willing to compromise on, right? And for me, that is like I didn't want to be the guy who went into work and had to be around people or ideas or in an environment that was like spiritually stifling to me, if
Mm-hmm.
that makes sense. And um, and again, it's not necessarily like I was worried about making money. Like everything happened for a reason in my life, but
Mm-hmm.
all those little changes and those iterations and, the ups and the downs of everything was, you know, really kind of, I guess I could lay it on the feet of like always being someone who's maybe introspective to a fault sometimes.
Mm.
Um, and willing to willing to disappoint other people potentially in my life that wanted something different, for me to kind of pursue the path that I thought was the right path.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So there's a lot to to break down in all of that. The
Sure.
first thing that really jumped out at me is that from what you're saying, you knew what you were suited to do early on.
Yeah.
And you had a vague idea of kind of the things that you were suited for, the things you'd enjoy. So you said, you didn't see yourself being an accountant, working with, numbers or anything like that. Um, so how can people really, you know, develop that self-knowledge and distill that self-awareness? Because for me, for example, I don't know if I'm actually wearing my Franciscan University hoodie
Oh,
right now.
awesome.
Um, yeah, I went to the Franciscan University of Steubenville. I dropped out last spring. It's just, I was, the last several semesters, I was going more for formation than the degree aspect of it. But the first few semesters, I really was, because it's just what was expected of me. My parents, I figured they would, and they did freak out when I was like, hey, I want to take a gap semester. And I
Mhm.
dropped out a little bit, and then I went back for a little while. Um, but people, especially with, social media and the excesses that it's taken to, and just always having the spotlight on you,
Mhm.
I feel like now more than ever, we have a much greater tendency to filter our decisions through the approval of others, whether it's random people online, our parents, our friends, all these different things. And that social pressure, I feel, is so much more impactful now than it used to be, because you just have this aspect of, nobody's going to forget about this. It's going to be out there forever. What if I ruin my reputation, my credit score, whatever,
Sure.
right? Um, so with respect to that, what, I guess, maybe this just gets back to, what you were saying about writing down and being very deliberate about that. But how can people, still those other influences so that they can tell what they really want, as opposed to just what they're being told they want or what they should want, if that
Yeah.
makes sense.
I would say that the most important thing to like to observe, like if is take like a view from above, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you can do something, when you can just effortlessly tap into a flow state of something, maybe that is rebuilding an engine on, your Corolla, your shitbox.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's that flow state for you. Maybe it's for me, it was music and writing.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever it is, like you'll have that. Like most people
Mm-hmm.
have that. And if someone doesn't, I mean, there are exceptions to that rule, just again, try different things. But for some people, that's art. It's like whatever you can do for sit down and just do for 3 straight hours without even
Mm-hmm.
thinking about anything else, without checking your phone, without, you know, feeling like feeling like it's a grind, like you have to motivate yourself to do that.
Mm-hmm.
That's like to me, that's like the best place that you can start. And then from there, you can start thinking like, okay, well, there's like that idea. Um, it's like I think it's called ikigai, right? It's this Japanese idea.
Oh, they do a hard thing. Is it that
Yeah,
one?
it's not it.
No,
It's
I'm thinking of Misogi. Sorry,
yeah,
that's different. Yeah.
all good. It's like this idea of like it's like what you're good at, what the world
Mm-hmm.
needs, what you can do to make money. And so it's like all of these, it's like this combination of
The
these, like,
three intersections. Yeah.
yeah, these three intersections. And like tempering your learning enough about the world and like being realistic with your goals. Like it's not like for
Mm-hmm.
music, I realized very soon, like especially when I started playing music and touring and playing with bands, it's the people who have successful musical careers generally don't just play music. Like it's not that necessarily
Mm-hmm.
their band. It's they're playing with their band, they're teaching lessons, they
Yeah.
they're building a brand online, they're doing YouTube. So it's like they're doing like 5 to 6 different things. People who are maybe good at art, it's like your art probably isn't what's going to make you money, but maybe a
Mm.
graphic design career will.
Yeah.
So it's like balancing the practical and the passion and finding
Mm-hmm.
that like middle ground, that
Yeah.
I think a lot of people, especially creative people, don't like to think like that in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because I feel maybe they'll like stifle their creativity and stuff like that. Um, but I think it really just, again, it comes down to trying a bunch of stuff and finding, like, when you're young, finding those things that you can just do that feel effortless to
Mm-hmm.
you and avoiding shiny object syndrome. Because like you said, with social media, maybe not only
Yeah.
you have like, there's two sides of it. Maybe your parents are like, go to college and do this, but you're scrolling and you're seeing all these like, hey, here's how you can make $20,000 a month. Here's how you can do this. Here's how you're
Yeah.
you also are seeing all these influencers and stuff. And for a lot of guys, it's, oh, this looks like a great opportunity. This looks like a great opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
And you fall back into that same thing, which
Yeah, I've
is,
done that.
if you're an introvert, maybe you shouldn't be taking sales calls. That's gonna,
Mm-hmm.
you're not gonna probably be good at it. And it's probably
Mm-hmm.
gonna be something that weighs on you. But it kind of, I guess it really comes down to like just developing that clarity of mind, reading a lot,
Mm-hmm.
um, and thinking about like who am I as a person? Like what are the few things that I can see myself doing?
Mm-hmm.
And then finding those ways to implement that in a way that allows you to, not be homeless and maybe
Yeah.
have a life that and a family and things like that that you also want.
Yeah. And that takes two things that I I mean, I'm 22, so a full decade younger than you, but I'll just say euphemistically, our generation to just kind of be all encompassing, sub 40, the younger distribution of things.
Right.
We're very bad at two of the things that requires, which is creating enough space and silence to actually reflect on these things, and then actually being honest with ourselves enough to kind of get to that point. Um, awesome. And so let's see. Oh yeah, what I was going to say is what was really interesting about kind of the first thing you said was you just have to try a lot of things. This is the third podcast I've done with somebody where that question has come up in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
All three of them have said, screw around and find something. And I'm wondering now if that's because subconsciously I'm looking for another answer.
Right.
Because like, realistically, being a 22-year-old, I have about, a quarter of my life done. give or take, assuming I don't get hit by a bus or something. Um, but you know, it's really interesting trying to develop that patience with the long-term perspective, but also being super aggressive in the moment because I'm, especially over the past few weeks, really coming to terms with the fact that I could live, my entire lifetime up till this point over again. I could even do it twice before I find that, that one thing that really just clicks for me.
Sure.
And so, being willing to kind of screw around and build and just experiment with things, I think is really important because, maybe this is also another Gen Z fault, wanting the quick fix, wanting the band-aid fix because everything's easy and,
Yep.
not really being willing to actually just shut up and do the work and not look for a hack or a gimmick
Yep.
to kind
And
of
it's
get through it.
always, you'll always learn something new about yourself. And
Hmm.
worst case scenario, like I was having this conversation with someone the other day, and it was like we were talking about money, and like I live in California, it's expensive here. Where I'm at, like a lot of people, like the cost of a house is pretty crazy, and a lot of people
Hmm.
are moving away. And it's like I was talking with someone just about this, and kind of just talking about business ideas and stuff. And I was like, look, man, like let's say you start like you want to be your own boss. Like let's say you start like a landscaping business. You do that,
Hmm.
you dedicate the time now, and you say, I'm going to do this for 6 months. Worst case scenario is you'll make some money and you'll realize you don't want to run a landscaping business. You know,
Hmm.
best case scenario is you find something, you find, a market that maybe allows you to make $10,000 a month. You hire a team, you start a
Hmm.
business, but the worst case scenario is you tried something for 6 months and you're off to the next thing, right?
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, 100%. And it is, we do kind of live our culture that we live in, definitely, I think it does look down on, um, it looks down on like your ability as an individual to actually
Hmm.
make, create the world that you want.
Yeah.
There's always a scapegoat. There's always someone else to blame. It's the economy, it's politicians, it's I don't, we don't have healthcare. It's it's capitalism. It's all these
Hmm.
things. And it's like there always will be a thing. Um, and those might have real, you might have some real issues with those things.
Hmm.
That doesn't mean that you can't dedicate time and figure something out or try to, at any time in your
Yeah.
life, you know?
Yeah. Not to mention the fact that everyone we look up to are people that have overcome things not because it was easy or, just gotten where they were by accident, but because they had some big challenge that they had to actually overcome. Um, so I want to read specifically from what you said on your little, backstory highlight here. You said, I learned from the experiences of others and realized that the only way to become the person I wanted to be was to step into the unknown. I combine this curiosity and desire to pursue my interest with a skill. I think that's very important because you're not just letting it be a dream, you're finding a way to, make it physical and material. And
Yep.
then you said that skill has always been writing. AI will never replace your voice. Is that always for you? Or are you saying writing is always a skill that anybody can develop?
It was more in the context of myself. I
Hmm.
do think everyone should write personally. I think it's just, even if it's like 5, 10 minutes a day, I think it's,
Hmm.
again, it just helps you get that personal clarity, if that's journaling or, you know, reading a book and writing down some thoughts on it,
Hmm.
Um,
So do
yeah.
you think it makes a difference what kind of genre you write? Because I mean, you could be doing, fiction, you could be reflecting, you could be, just scribbling down notes about how your day went. Does that really matter? Is it more just the discipline of getting your thoughts on paper that's the important thing?
I think it starts with the discipline, and it's like it comes from a place of, initially it's like it should always be a place of like, I'm I'm doing this because I know it's good for me, and
Hmm.
I'm not gonna judge what I put down. I'm not gonna think too hard about this. Like obviously, like my Instagram, right? I spend a lot of time writing like nonfiction
Hmm.
things, ideas that I see taken from, I read a lot. I'm always trying to
Hmm.
see like what ideas are important to write about in like this time, and I am working on like a fiction project as well, which is again something totally new. But
Okay.
it all starts with it, in my opinion, it just starts with this idea of, you know, I like I just want to do something that like I just want to try a new habit. I want to try and develop this. And
Mm-hmm.
whatever it turns into 6 months from now, I'm not even thinking about that. It happens holistically.
Mm.
You might start just writing down some thoughts that you're having about maybe something that you're observing or something in the culture, a book you're reading, and then you go, "Wow, I really like this. Like maybe I want to share this with more people and
Mm.
turn this into something I do for fun, or start a newsletter, right?"
Yeah.
Um, it really kind of goes for anything, like before I've got like to use the mechanic example, I've got friends who are super, super like mechanically inclined for stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And for them, it like that curiosity started by how does these parts fit together to do this?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like taking things apart and rebuilding things. And now it's like, cool. It's like that transfers into a career over time, you know? So
Yeah.
sorry, I think I answered your question. I might have been a
Yeah,
little
definitely.
confused.
Definitely. And it is very interesting. I once had a mentor state a very obvious fact, which is you never connect the dots looking forward. But if you look back, you're always like, oh, duh, of course this happened in this way to give me, this connection or this opportunity or this skill set or whatever. And it might not seem like it has purpose, but I mean, if you're a man of faith like me, you believe that, there is an order to the universe, that God is deliberately kind of directing the course of your life, and he's going to put the things in that you need, along the way to help you with that. Um,
Absolutely.
so as far as kind of thinking for yourself goes in developing that idea,
Mhm.
um, I believe you said earlier that the reason that you got out of the education system was because you just really didn't like the approach that it was taking. And from a completely removed perspective, just as like an intellectual thing, I do find it very interesting how pretty much every position of authority in society is being weaponized in a way that actually deters progress. And in a lot of like
Yeah.
traditionalist circles, they don't like to hear the word progress because they equate that with degeneracy and just destroying everything that came before, standing on the shoulders of giants and not recognizing that, all these different things.
Sure.
But the fact remains that the reason that these positions of authority exist is because they're traditionally the people that we would go to kind of push the boundaries and try these things. Like you look at most of the great writers that we remember, whether we agree with them on a philosophical standpoint or not, they were challenging some preconceived notion, right? So you got Copernicus with the heliocentric model of the universe. You've got good gravy. Why am I blanking on his name? That great Russian novelist.
Dostoevsky.
Dostoevsky, yes, Dostoevsky. All these different things they're writing about. Specifically, oh, Solzhenitsyn. That's the other one. Yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
Solzhenitsyn.
They're
Absolutely.
they're they're all writing about things in not necessarily opposition, but at the very least challenging what's currently held. So, I guess I have a twofold question. The first part is, when are appeals to authority legitimate?
Hmm.
And then, in your opinion, is there anything that can be done to really salvage the system that we have right now, or would it be better to just raise it to the ground and start over?
Oh man, those are both really interesting questions.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Thank you.
yeah, I mean, in regards to the first one, I think it's hard to know how to appeal to authority if you don't understand the goal and the foundation of like an institution.
Mm.
Like in education, you know, the and there's always been problems with education. I'm not saying like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
100 years ago or in the 1950s, like education was great, like there's legitimate, you know, there's legitimate flaws in old
Mm-hmm.
models of education, just like there are today. But
Of course.
I think that it's hard to have like a compass and formulate your own opinion when you just assume that a credential or something that someone has, like you lack the education to understand the problem, right? And
Mm-hmm.
again, I think that education is a perfect example of this because ideally you get you're taught not what to think, but how to think, you know,
Mm-hmm.
first principles thinking. And you're, even when I graduated high school in 2009, and I took classes at a community college right away. And
Mm-hmm.
what was interesting about taking those classes at a community college then versus going back to school in my mid to late 20s was the the educational institutions had yet to kind of be captured by this, I guess you could call it, this critical social justice ideology, this
Mm-hmm.
victimhood ideology. So in my classes, I had guys who were just getting back from like their tour of Afghanistan, and
Oh, wow.
we had moms, and we had all sorts of
Yeah.
different people. And there was actually really good discussion because when we talk about something like, we talk, about the Civil War, we talk about these periods in history, and we were able to actually have I was able to see someone else's perspective. They were able to see mine.
Mm-hmm.
We learned from each other. We may not agree, but we were able to become better thinkers by seeing like, okay, well, this is how they came to their conclusion. This is how I came to my conclusion. What merits do either side have?
Mm-hmm.
And that's like a really just being able to have those types of discussions with people is, in my opinion, one of the best ways you can learn.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, you know, this is why these figures in this period of history or these authority figures were misguided. This was
Mm-hmm.
the operating code that they were running that was flawed,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And um now I think for me, maybe it's because I do spend a lot of time reading, but it's
Mm-hmm.
I'm always looking at like I'm looking at our like political leadership now or like our educational
Mm-hmm.
now. And it's easy for me to see like, oh, well, clearly they're not teaching people how to think. They're just teaching people what to think based on my experience, based on
Mm-hmm.
about, like the ideology that's guiding their thought process.
Mm-hmm.
And personally, I disagree with it. Other people might find that those ideas um I don't want to like they might agree with them. They might see value in them, but
Mm-hmm.
that's it's hard to have that discussion or hard to know what to think about people in positions of authority without being curious enough to learn about what it is they're actually saying first.
Yeah.
And I see that a lot I feel like the left doesn't understand people who are, like you and I, maybe conservative or on the right as they would see it. I don't feel like they can represent
Yeah.
positions, but I feel like we can represent their positions very well,
Mm-hmm.
because they dominate the media, they dominate our politics,
Yeah.
our educational institutions, and it's easy for us to be able to say, well, here's like the logical flaws, and generally they resort to ad hominem attacks, like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
you know, you're just a white male or you're whatever.
Yep. Yeah, you're sexist, racist, homophobic, opinion disregarded.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's
So, like, go ahead.
I was just going to say one thing that's really interesting to me too is trying to figure out how to bridge that gap culturally because we've gotten to the point where the we have the two-party system that the founders of the founding fathers feared for America,
Mhm.
and it's gotten to the point where most people, it seems, aren't really able to fathom that you don't fit perfectly into one of these ideological camps. So, like, either you're Republican or Democrat or conservative or liberal, and there's no room for any disagreement or anything. But the truth is, dumbassery is a tale old as time. And people categorically, if we just look at all of the disasters throughout history, categorically, people are really dumb. Now, they make decisions based on the information that they have available, like you were saying just a minute ago. But that doesn't change the fact that people are very prone to just making bad decisions in retrospect.
Yeah.
and then doubling down and having to stick with that because it's like, well, you can't show any weakness. So in terms of like a practical way forward for kind of having these conversations, you said one of the things that helped you to develop your worldview and your mentality was being able to have these conversations with people. And I really love when I'm able to meet someone that thinks completely differently than me.
Mhm.
Um, long story short, I was staying at a good friend's house a while back.
Mhm.
Um, and his wife had a friend over who was like a new agey astrology girl. We went down this conspiracy theory rabbit hole. She was trying to convince me that humanity is actually aliens from the dark side of the moon and all these different things. But it was like, I'm dead serious, but it was such an interesting conversation because we actually had a lot of common ground on different things.
Right.
And so to be able to say like, you know, we have such a massive gap in what we believe about the world, but we're not freaking out. We're not calling each other names. We're actually having an honest conversation.
Yeah.
So my question for you is, I guess, what would you consider to be the indicators that someone is open to having those conversations? Because part of it is just having the humility to admit that you may be wrong, and like you might have that, but who's to say the other person will? And then when it's better to just kind of not so much give up on people, but just disengage and say, you know what, this argument isn't worth it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a tough one because, I think my friends and I, like most of my friends, we share similar opinions. Dude, I
Mm-hmm.
kind of lost friends during COVID. Some friends, because
Yeah.
I didn't get the shots and things like that.
Yeah.
But it's like really the way that I try and approach, and I don't always do this online, and that's kind of we'll come to my second point in a second, but
Mm-hmm.
the way I approach conversations with people in the real world who I may disagree with is I just ask them questions. And this is something
Socratic
that
method.
I've always been interested in too when I was going into education was, you know, people generally just like the average person is concerned with, okay, my groceries are expensive. This, like they're not,
Mm-hmm.
they don't have time to read. They don't have time for theory. Like I consider myself, I don't expect people to meet me on that same level. Like
Mm-hmm.
you have to read this in order to know what I'm thinking. But if I ask some questions like, oh, well, like why do you think this? And
Mm-hmm.
they'll lead themselves to maybe not my conclusion, but they'll see my perspective instead of me telling them like, hey, this is why your thinking is wrong and flawed, even if that's what I'm thinking, or even
Mm-hmm.
worse, like I think your thinking's borderline like evil, right? Which I
Yeah.
believe. But if I ask these questions to people, a lot of times they'll kind of you'll see the conversation happening in their head in real time.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times that will just get people to disconnect. They'll disengage. They don't even
Mm-hmm.
imagine that there is a flaw
That
in
they
them.
could be wrong. Yeah.
It could be wrong. You know, now with certain issues, like there's certain lines in the sand with me. Like, dude, like I have a daughter, like we live in California,
Yeah. I was
and
gonna ask about that.
the trans stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Personally, I am that is like a one of the biggest issues for me personally because I see it reflected here. I think
Mm-hmm.
it's a symptom of like I think that our culture again has kind of has degenerated into like some basic like what you and I would call like 50 or 60 years ago some like we're kind of being run by the asylum a little bit and
Mm-hmm.
our empathy's been weaponized and it's very hard for people to admit that like yeah maybe their ideological belief is like causing real harm to people.
Mm-hmm.
And there's like a real like religious intoxication with these people.
Yeah.
And I don't find myself like wanting to engage with that if even if I'm approaching it open-mindedly and asking these questions.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes though, it's like um it's a law of averages, right? If you have enough of these
Mm-hmm.
conversations, maybe one or two of these people will kind of see your perspective. A lot of people won't. Um, and again, it's like, what is best for your time too? So for
Mm-hmm.
me personally, it's like it's kind of this dichotomy between being open to talking with people about it and also understanding the realpolitik of it, which is,
Mm-hmm.
you know, the other side or sides, right? Like if you learn enough about history, you realize that at kind of the end of the day, the laws, the laws are written by those who, through an application of their own power and strength, um, win the game.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of the faults that we have in America is by trying to have too many conversations, and especially, again, I don't want to like go back to this kind of left versus right thing, because
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a big problem. But in terms of like what I see, I'm not, I guess you could say, like, if I had to vote, it'd be for a Republican, but I also don't like the
Mm-hmm.
Republicans because I think
Yeah.
they're spineless. I
Yeah.
think they have a spine. And I think that, you know, at the end
I
of the
think
day,
that you asked, that's the least of your issues.
yeah, you have to be willing to establish an
Mm-hmm.
order that is going to minimize the most harm and maximize the most
Mm-hmm.
potential for human flourishing. And that's not necessarily something you can get to by having
Mm-hmm.
conversations. That's something that you have to apply. And that's the exact reason why, kind of going back to your earlier point about, well, should we raise the
Mm-hmm.
system to the ground or should we work within it? It's kind of a combination
Mm-hmm.
of both. It's like throughout history, the worst acts of human history have been done by one person, but you've also had, in
Mm.
aristocracies and monarchies,
A system that allows it. Yeah.
you've had people that, like the Roman Empire, the five good emperors, right? There was
Mm-hmm.
250 years basically of peace because there were five, men of integrity and honor running the society. And then as soon as Marcus Aurelius dies and Commodus, his son takes over,
Yep.
it's chaos for another 150 years
Mm-hmm.
because it's rule by one. But
Mm-hmm.
I'm not certain that the United States, where we're at right now, to me, like the Constitution means basically nothing.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of
It
leaning
only means something if it's weaponized against the citizenry. The rest of the time, it's irrelevant.
exactly. And so really I lean more towards this idea that, well, you know, nothing is set in stone. Like I'm an American,
Mm-hmm.
I'm very proud to be an American. I love this country, but you know, when do we
Mm-hmm.
just adjust the whole thing? Like what does that
Yeah.
look
And you can't say you love your country and then just put blinders on and pretend that there's nothing wrong with it ever.
like?
That's been a really interesting conversation. I was working on my dad for years and years and years. I finally convinced him to get a gun. Just a few months ago, we've gone to the range with it a few times, everything like that. But he still disagrees with me very heavily that I think um, that it should ever be used for anything beyond like protecting yourself from a home invader.
Sure.
And it's like obviously violence should never be a first resort. Like the founding fathers make it very clear that they are going into revolt because they've tried to have their various grievances addressed and they weren't, or at least not to their satisfaction, right? Um, but like, the idea that it kind of going back to what we were saying earlier about, people being able to make their own decisions and learn things for themselves, like we're given free will for a reason. And part of that is to be able to decide how we want our lives to go. And I think it's very uncomfortable, especially for people of my dad's generation to really um admit that they were just lied to about a lot of things. Like
Yeah.
he in retrospect, like I was very much the same thing, complete hardliner, like I'm not getting the COVID jab, never will,
Mhm.
all these different things. I stopped with the like the masking and all that when I got tired of it too. um but he was one of those people where like he's kind of come around in retrospect, but he doesn't want to accept the implication, at least the way I'm reading it. I want to be very clear. I love my dad. He's
Oh
an
yeah.
awesome dude,
Yep.
like wonderful example for me in many ways. But one of our big disagreements is possibly because I'm on the younger side. I'm more hot-headed and prone to just kind of just action and do something to change things. But also in my recent lifetime, the cracks in the system have been a lot more obvious than in the formative years of his life. And so he's kind of operating from the paradigm of the system works, and then I'm operating from the paradigm of like, my first 2 to 3 years
Mhm.
as an actual functioning political adult, like I was 18 in 2020.
Mhm.
My first 3 years were the entire system being weaponized against me, not just the government, not just the media, not just intelligentsia, like all of it, telling me
Right.
I was a bad person, I was a white supremacist, I'm murdering people's grandmothers, and it's like, okay, maybe that's not the kind of world that I really want
No.
to live in. Yeah, but that's going down a whole other rabbit hole.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it is very interesting, just kind of trying to figure out how to function in a world that is so divided. Because in the past, like you didn't care if your next door neighbor had differing political beliefs than you. Like, you had to worry about the Visigoths rolling up on your city and just burning it to the ground and
Right.
murdering you. So that shift in priorities too, I think, allows us to just invent issues that have never been a thing before, because we physically have not had the ability to um, focus on them. I want to kind of get back to the idea of being, kind of well read and examining your worldview.
Mm.
You were talking about how the modern education system very much teaches you what to think and very often not how to think it. My question is, under what circumstances do you consider it acceptable to be told what to think? Because obviously, like, nobody has the time every day to reason through every single position that they have. We're going to
Sure.
have to take some things on faith. So what makes that determination for you?
Culture and values, personally, I think, and I think that there is, right, like when you're let's use like an example of like the boomer generation, like
Mm-hmm.
your dad, my parents, stuff like that, right? Clearly like you're more like I'm more millennial, you're more Gen Z. We have a lot of
Mm-hmm.
similarities and stuff. We're closer to like the online culture and things like that.
Yes, very much.
But my family, my extended family who's on the left, my extended family who's more conservative, still grew up with very similar shared cultural values. And
Mm.
they might have disagreed. Like my great grandma, she was the first Democrat mayor of a city in California, huge FDR
Mm.
supporter,
That's
very.
right, because California used to be all red.
Yep, exactly. And she, like they grew up in poverty. She died when she was 99. And my great grandpa was kind of the exact opposite, but it was nothing, it didn't hurt their relationship because they
Hmm.
shared the same. What they disagreed about was, oh, well, maybe, poor people should have a little bit more handouts, or maybe this.
Hmm.
It was minor policy disagreement. It wasn't disagreement about the entire thing.
Should we continue existing or not? Yeah.
Existing, is America worthy of existing at all, right? And
Hmm.
so, when you look at like, again, like I love reading about history, right? And
Hmm.
like when you look at the founding of America and the, Greece and Rome and any society that's ever lasted, the job of the older generation isn't is to give the cultural values and be able to
Hmm.
distill cultural values to the next generation. And that requires
Mm.
being told what to think, right?
Yeah.
You know, there were a lot of founding fathers who were very religious and Christian. There were also founders who were skeptical of religion and more on the Enlightenment side, but they
Yeah.
all still shared the foundations of the Christian values.
Hmm.
Thomas Jefferson was skeptical of Jesus, of the divinity of Jesus, right?
Hmm.
That's something
He was a deist, if I remember.
he
Yeah.
was a deist. Yeah, he believed in God, but he didn't necessarily think that Jesus was the son of God, right?
Hmm.
Now, other founding fathers did. But what Jefferson realized, and what a lot of these, guys realized, was the moral foundations of the Christian tradition and the fact that, either they might have held these beliefs in private or they might,
Hmm.
even publicly, but they still understood that the country has to have a shared set of cultural values in order to exist. And that requires, you know, being told what to think. Japan,
Hmm.
it's a very homogenous culture. When you look at videos, like my wife went to Japan a few years ago. When people are told to walk on this side, they walk on this side. When people are told, we take off our shoes when we enter the house. Like these are things that are, they're taboo not to do that because you're speaking against the how should I say it? You're undermining the foundation that has allowed the country and the culture to get to now. Now, of course, people can have different beliefs within that, right? But what I think is missing now is this idea that like the values are undefined, things that and that's something that I try and explore in my writing, which is, well, what are the values from the past that we've lost sight of that can help us get back to some place of normalcy so that we can, like I don't want to go back to living, I don't want to live like an Amish lifestyle. I want to live in the 21st century. I like all this technology. I think
yeah, toilet paper is pretty nice.
Yeah, toilet paper is great. Flushing toilets are great. I would take being poor now rather than living like a rock 150 years ago. But
yeah,
what's missing is like a shared set of cultural values. And that's why I've become very skeptical of things like mass immigration and things like that, because right now, in comparison to what the United States used to be, when people came over to the United States, they had an understanding of, there was a selection mechanism. Like my great grandfather immigrated from Sweden, leaving some of his family behind in Sweden because he aligned with the cultural American values, even though he was a Swede and he had his own culture and he had things like that. But he oh my God, what's the word? He integrated into American culture because he shared these same set of cultural values. Young people today, and like what I saw in education, don't have these same set of cultural values. The cultural values become inverted. Again, I think it can be laid at the feet of, really like Marxism. It's the same exact type of conditioning that happened during, when Russia went through its revolution. The history was destroyed. The values were inverted. Same with China's Cultural Revolution. And it's the same things happening here, but on a less violent scale, at least initially, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, anyway.
It's all very, very interesting to look at kind of how other people have gotten to this point and then what happens afterward and kind of how we can conduct ourselves. One thing that and this is kind of a synthesis of a few different topics that I wanted to touch on. One of the things that is very engaging and enjoyable about your account is the fact that you're very articulate with what you're trying to say, but you're also relatively concise. So you don't need people to read a 5-paragraph essay to, understand the point of a post. You've got just, a couple sentences per slide, or you've got, a minute long reel or something like that. So, and this feeds into the larger idea of creating beauty and kind of creating that culture and the things that people will be willing to actually live for, and in some cases even die for. The reason for that being that, if language is used well, it's a very beautiful thing. I I didn't get through it, but over the summer, I actually have it up here on my shelf right now. But I started rereading the Silmarillion, which is one of Tolkien's prequels to the Lord of the Rings, and it like the way it is written is just beautiful. The thing that's interesting about the language that he uses specifically is that it does require definitely a much higher vocabulary than we would say like the population averages. But the way the sentences are constructed, it's not pretentious and it's not overly burdensome to understand, but it's still written in such a way and with such a flow and a structure to it that it's more beautiful than most of the poetry, I would argue, that people are writing today, because it's just so much more precise with what he means to say and the feelings and the emotions that he wants to evoke while he's doing that. So I'm wondering, from your perspective in doing this account and then looking more broadly at the culture, how can we take these big ideas, if you will,
Mhm.
and really distill them down into something so that we are, recognizing the importance of beauty. And maybe you can elaborate a little bit on why we should care about that in the first place.
Sure.
Um, and then, how to cultivate that in our daily lives and to live in a way where we have, not just verbally, but more on the level of a soul, to
Mhm.
have the vocabulary and the conciseness to know what you believe, to stand by what you believe, to support it, and then to, not take too long to really reason through these things yourself. I
Right.
know that's a lot, but
No, that's again, that's a great question. And I'm a huge Tolkien fan. I'm a huge
Mhm.
Tolkien nerd. Actually, like what I put on sometimes, like when I'm working on the background is um just it's a minor plug. He's got a great YouTube channel. It's called Nerd of the Rings. And
Oh, I've heard of him.
yeah, and he breaks down like Tolkien lore and stuff like that. It's just
Hmm.
entertaining. But you know, beauty, like before we kind of get into language, like beauty to me is, found, found in like the divine, you know.
Hmm.
Um, and I do think that when we can connect to a higher power, for some people that's a religious faith. I think that's really like the most. I think religious faith has a lot. It's a deeper connection to that higher power because
Hmm.
less it's less self-guided, which it's a little bit less narcissistic in that way to think that you can find
Yeah.
that higher power. But um beauty is really like, I don't know if you're familiar with Roger Scruton, but he's
Yes.
a lot about beauty and what that means. And
Hmm.
it's making things, it's making things and thinking of things outside of their like pure utility, right? So like why
Hmm.
do we, when we're doing some woodworking or something, why do we take the time to make it look, why do we take the time to add ornamentation to it? It's because it speaks to the potential, like our aspirations as human beings. And
Hmm.
um you know, language is really like, for me, that's, and I mean art, creativity in general, and whatever, like if you've tapped in, going back to the beginning of our conversation, if you've tapped in and you found that thing that you love doing that doesn't feel like work, that you can add to the world, like you're
Hmm.
contributing something beautiful to the world, like you're aiming higher, and it's outside of like the pure utility of life. And
Hmm.
there's no the Greeks, I can't remember who said it, but the Greeks, I think it was just actually a general Greek idea, which is I'd rather be dead than just be mere life. And that's why
Yeah.
the Greek aristocracy looked down on farmers as opposed to warriors
Hmm.
and other people. Now, I've got no problem. I encourage people to be self, have that. That's not how I think, but
Yeah.
the idea is, it's better to engage actively with the world and seek that aspirational nature of who you are as a human and who you are as a person.
Hmm.
Um, and the reason why I like to try and keep my writing concise is I think that beauty is, it's you either you see it and you know what it is, and you
Hmm.
don't need to rationalize it. You don't need to overthink it. Um, and I mean, I try and obviously write in a way that I'm optimizing for the algorithm on some level.
Yeah.
Like I don't want to, I want people to retain the
Of
information.
course. Of course.
Um, but I also think that the best way to write beautifully and think in a way that helps you understand what beauty is in the world is to just aim straight at the idea and describe what it is you're saying. Um, I
Hmm.
think the sign of a poor thinker in a lot of ways is using language and trying to intellectualize um, the act of creating. Like you see, like modern art's a
Yeah.
perfect example. You go to a modern art museum and you have, a black square on the wall, and you have
Hmm.
20 paragraphs next to it explaining to you what it is, because it's not beautiful. It's
Hmm.
it's humans intellectualizing and speaking in metaphors and in the abstract to try and
Hmm.
present some idea. But when you see a painting from Thomas Cole, or you see some artwork that, from like a statue of David or something like this, you don't need
Hmm.
a paragraph to describe what to think. You know it when you see
Yeah.
it. Like, and it's very self-evident.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think, yeah, I think it
I was
comes.
just going to,
Oh, go ahead,
go
please.
ahead. Okay. I was just going to say that's very in line with St. Thomas Aquinas' definition of beauty, where he basically just says that beautiful things are those which are pleasing to look upon, or, something to that effect, where
Yep.
it's, you can't define something beautiful by its accidents. So like in the case of, that modern art painting,
Mm.
definitionally it's a painting because it's, a canvas hanging on a wall with some, dried oil of different colors on it or whatever.
Sure.
But when you try to operationalize it, that takes the soul and the human element out of what's actually meant to be,
Right.
conveyed by that medium.
Yep. And again, like as someone too who, I know you're a Christian, I
Mm-hmm.
was an atheist for a long time, an agnostic, and I'm returning to my faith over the last
Mm.
year and a half, which has been a really, really powerful. I could get into that. It's been a really powerful experience, but you
Yeah.
know, God is, right? Like it just is.
Mm-hmm.
And um, there's I think, a lot of the kind of going back to what you said about having that conversation with that friend, that mutual friend of yours. It's
Mm-hmm.
like she's looking for that same thing that you and I are looking for when we're reading,
Yep.
you know, and she's finding it in her own way, but it lacks, I think, it's a religious seeking. There's a lot of
Mm-hmm.
religious seeking in our society. There's probably more religious seeking in our society right now than there was when, in my opinion, when, oh my God, I'm forgetting the very, very Orthodox Christians that arrived. The Puritans arrived, right?
Oh yes.
Puritans, they were operating on, obviously, like worship was a big part of their life, but
Mm-hmm.
they weren't intellect. They just did it because they knew it to be true.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone is seeking something right now. Young people, even though less young people in general are going to church or involved in a religious denomination or faith, everyone's looking for something,
Mm-hmm.
and they're
Yeah, it
finding,
goes
yeah,
goes back to what you said earlier about the making the political situation a religion almost, and people having this zeal and this fervor surrounding their emotional attachment to these things. I think it was C.S. Lewis or Chesterton or somebody like that that once argued that um, you can't take the disposition for religiosity out of the population.
Mhm.
So people, you can do your whole, God is dead and we killed him thing. You can do all these things, and um, you can destroy cultural values, muddy the water so people can't develop an appreciation for, you know inarguable values, the good, true, and beautiful, things like that.
Sure.
But then people are going to be looking for something to fill that void, because we understand inherently that if we live life for ourselves and nothing else, we've wasted the life, because then it doesn't have any meaning beyond our own lifetime.
Exactly.
And so yeah, that's really what that kind of lends itself toward. And to your point, I think the reason that we have the least, or the most seeking generation to ever exist, is specifically because we have so much less of a foundation than we did, and so that emptiness is much more real for people. C.S. Lewis has a line where he says that pain is God's megaphone to rouse a deaf world, and I think we're really seeing that come to a head in the modern world here.
We really are, man. 100%.
Mm.
Couldn't agree more. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. So specifically with um, reference to kind of cultivating that sense of beauty in your life, what do you do specifically? First, to just, you know, be exposed to these things, and then also to be able to enjoy them in the proper context, so you're not in that defensive mode where you're, worrying about finances, or
Mhm.
um, just the million things that people have going on in their lives.
Sure.
How do you create the space and the presence to really do that?
Yeah. It's a good question. It's definitely, it's always a work in progress.
Mhm.
Like every part of life, I think, has its seasons. It's like the energy that I had at 22, like, was steered more towards, like, again, it was like I want to go out into the world. I want to create
Mm-hmm.
something. I want to find who I am. I want to experience things and meet new people and things like that. And that to me was, like that was my focus. Like I wasn't hitting
Mm-hmm.
the gym, I wasn't eating right, I was probably drinking too much. It was like, and all those things, like, yeah, that focus would be probably tailored. It probably would have been easier for me to find it with less effort if I had those other things in order.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's very, I'm lucky to be in this place where, I love what I do for work. Um, obviously, like anyone, I wish there was like an eighth extra day of the week sometimes, but
Yeah.
it's like I try and like practice gratitude, a lot of it,
Mm,
Gratitude to me
yeah.
is one of the easiest things that we can do every day that allows us to appreciate and see the beauty in things that otherwise we wouldn't, we wouldn't
Mm-hmm.
kind of pass over, right? So like the fact that I have, like you said, a running water, a flushing toilet, I own my home, like I'm
Lights
married.
are on. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm married. I have a beautiful daughter, like, and I've got the internet. I can explore and learn about different things. I've got good friends, and I've got projects outside that I can
Mm-hmm.
turn off my phone or just listen to something and just work with my hands. And all of these things to me are like, things that I've cultivated that have taken a lot of time. That
Mm-hmm.
to me right now, it's like this is what allows me to appreciate beauty in this current moment of my life. And
Yeah.
that would be, if for example, if I was 22 and I had all these things, there probably would be a part of me that's like felt like, even though I'm providing for my family and living a great life, like I'm still missing out on a beautiful aspect of life because
Mm-hmm.
I might have passed over the need to go and play music for 4 or 5 years. You know what I mean?
Mm, yeah.
Um, but because I've done that and I have that experience, and like, it's always a memory and something I can have, it's like I think I'm in a good place that,
Mm-hmm.
you know, I can appreciate every moment of my day. It doesn't necessarily feel like a grind. And again, another thing too that I haven't touched on, but is getting in shape, for anyone, like
Yeah.
like hitting the gym and staying physically and mentally like sharp is just so important for being in a mindset where you can appreciate these things and
Mm-hmm.
enjoy your life in a way that um you know it's if I was really out of shape, it'd be a lot harder to go and like build the foundation for the second unit that I'm putting on my
Mm-hmm.
property right now, because all I'd be thinking about is like, God, like, dang, this sucks, like I can't even
Mm-hmm.
do this without being winded or something like that. But um, you know, covering those bases and building the foundation, spiritually and emotionally,
Mm-hmm.
physically, allows you to appreciate just the act of living in the way that you do as a human,
Mm-hmm.
you know. Um, so yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, it's kind of an abstract answer, but
No, that makes a lot of sense because if you're being grateful, that forces you to exist in the present moment because you're not worrying about the past and you're not looking forward with, anxiety about what's going to come in the future. You're in the exact present moment saying, these are the good things in my life. These are the gifts and the blessings that I have. And, like you pointed out, most of well, the vast majority of all the blessings we have are things that we don't even think about until we're actually looking for them. And then you're like, wow.
yeah,
Like I have this experience very routinely walking into Walmart of all places when I'm going grocery shopping because it's like 90% of the stuff in here, from the food perspective is terrible for you.
sure,
However, it is just amazing that we can have a society that can have this variety of options, overnight shipping supplied anywhere in the country. You're not limited to the brand of protein you're buying. You're not limited to the type of protein you're buying. You want to get salmon, you want to get steak, you want chicken, you want eggs, whatever, go for it. Like
right.
that is an amazing thing that we just don't process most of the time because
It's a miracle, to be
yeah,
honest.
and it's unprecedented. Like if you were a king in the 1600s and said you wanted ice cream, I'm sorry, buddy, you're out of luck.
Yeah, you're screwed.
You can get a
Absolutely,
gallon for $3 now. It's things like that are just amazing. So that makes
100%.
complete sense.
And I
Um,
would suggest too, like, something that helped me cultivate that is, one, like obviously connecting again with my faith, but reading, I know Stoicism it's kind of it's been inverted by, the Ryan Holiday
Yeah.
and stuff like that. But reading the source material, man, like reading
Yeah.
meditations and, just like taking a view from above and doing some negative visualization, like nothing will make
Mm.
if you're in like some stupid argument with your girlfriend or wife over something, which obviously, it happens to everyone, the best thing you could do in that moment is just imagine that she just disappears. And then, you
Hmm.
realize like, oh my God, like, wow, I'm actually one that is a really pointless conversation we were just having. Let's just move on from it. But
Yeah.
you just get like this massive perspective shift.
Hmm.
Imagine if Walmart didn't exist. Imagine if you had to spend half your day just getting the resources you need to survive. Like,
Yeah.
wow, it really changes like how you see the world and how you act in the world and how you appreciate things.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, this has been amazing, man. We've been talking for I think a little over an hour now.
Uh,
This was somewhat how I expected this conversation to go, but I'm very, very happy with kind of all the different things we've been able to touch on. And I mean,
Likewise.
I don't know about you, I feel like we could probably keep going for a lot longer. Before we get going, one thing that I realized I wanted to ask
Please, yeah, if you have
earlier.
any final questions, I don't have any like pressing time concerns. So if we have
Yeah.
a few more questions, let me know and we can do it.
Yeah, absolutely. So the one that occurred to me earlier, when we were talking about the education stuff, you also mentioned earlier you have a daughter. I was very blessed with my upbringing. My parents made sure that I went to a couple different private Catholic schools my entire K through 12, and then obviously I went to Franciscan. So I've always been in communities that, and contrary to many Catholic schools, probably by reputation, they actually did teach me a good deal, and I did learn a lot about kind of logic, theology, philosophy, all these different things. So it was a very good foundation for me. But I recognize that I am in the vast majority of people, and I mean, with you teaching, um, in a school, you've probably seen more of this firsthand as well. So I'm curious, with reference to your daughter and any future children that you have, are you going to be doing homeschooling, private school? What's your take on that?
Depends on where she ends. It depends on if we stay in California or not.
Mm,
Right now, our plan is to homeschool. Um, One, just because I feel like I'm much more suited to to teach her about things than some random person with a college degree. I mean,
hmm.
I know I'm also a random person with a college degree. Thankfully, I feel like I've got, like
No, the office of father gives you priority there.
exactly. Yeah. And I just saw in the like if you look at there's a really interesting chart. It's the average IQs of college degree holders. And of
Oh
course,
my goodness.
by degree type. And of course, at the very top, average IQ, it's like 135 for like your physics and your math majors. And then by the time you get down to education, it's it's like below it's like 96. The
Hmm.
average is 100, right? And not to say like I'm not like an IQ clerk or anything like that, but being in an education environment in getting my degree in that, like I did see, just a lot of unintelligent people who were
Hmm.
passing these classes and eventually going to like teach my kids what to think and I just didn't that didn't sit right with me. Um,
Hmm.
I'm also, something my wife and I are working in really diligent and working towards is, um, raising our daughter in an environment and, whatever future kids we have as well, where education isn't something that you have to sit down and get drilled into your head. It happens throughout the day. It
Hmm.
happens when we're working on house projects together. It happens when, we're on hikes and, maybe we're with friends, like we're going to a local farm and we're learning about things there. It's like that's science class to me, and
Hmm.
math class is like, hey, here's how we're gonna square this and we're gonna
Hmm.
measure this and cut this. That to me is a much more practical form of education.
Hmm.
And so our plan is to homeschool. I mean, something might change eventually. The thing in California is kids now, and this wasn't the case before COVID, but if you want to send a kid to elementary school, they've got to have like 12 shots, like
Oh
before.
yeah.
Now, I'm not like I'm against the COVID vaccines.
Hmm.
Frankly, I just don't know enough. Like the really old vaccines, like the measles and mumps, like
Yeah.
it's a conversation my wife and I are doing we're doing our research, we're reading a lot about it, we're learning about it, um,
Hmm.
to see if that's something we want to do. But I just don't think that I just don't it my gut instinct, which I operate on a lot, tells me that it's not good to shoot kids with 12 to 14 vaccines before they're one.
Hmm.
She doesn't have any right now, so we might get some in the future, but that also disqualifies her from public school in California
Hmm.
entirely. Um,
Gotcha. Okay.
Now there are some, like, there's a Catholic school like down the street that they're actually, what's funny is their enrollment, they almost shut down a couple of years ago. Now they have a waiting list of like
Really?
years.
Oh yeah, because of all the things that have been happening in the culture.
Exactly.
That's
So
right. Yeah, people are leaving the public school in droves.
yeah, there might be that potential avenue down the road.
Hmm.
Who knows? Like eventually, like obviously, like we've got this home here. We're going to keep it as like a family home for the rest of our lives. But
Hmm.
we might move. Honestly, that's a conversation we're having too. Like maybe we
No.
move, maybe we move to Nevada. Maybe we move to Florida, or a state that's a little bit less
Hmm.
theologically, uh, you know, infiltrated.
Annexed. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But really, like, thankfully, like my group of friends, and there's a pretty big homeschooling community here.
Hmm.
A lot of like back to the land hippie types and stuff, which is cool.
Yep.
Um, like they're good people, even though we might disagree on some stuff. It's like they're a lot of good people, a lot of farmers,
Hmm.
stuff like that. So that's kind of the general plan. Um, you know, cross that bridge when we come to it for sure.
Hmm.
I think it's very, very strange that we're okay with giving our children for a majority of the life that we get to spend with them before they move out
Hmm.
of the house to someone else. I just think that's weird.
Yeah. Especially
So
the state. That is, yeah, very bizarre standard.
exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I guess this will be my final like interview question, if you will, before we get to closing here. How has becoming a father really shifted your perspective on life? So, for context, my buddy Joe McCarthy, who was actually the first interview show that I had on here, very similar. He works in the yeah, Grow With Us agency, so the social media company. Um, got ahead of the curve on a lot of things. I love this guy. So he's 21 years old. He has a daughter named Bonnie,
Oh,
who
cool.
I think is just about to turn one.
Good for him.
Um, yeah, and he's like, yeah, a lot of respect for the guy. Just overall an amazing dude. Um, he is very adamant on homeschooling Bonnie because we actually went to the same high school and he hated it. Like he I didn't mind school because I was like usually an A or B student. There were exceptions, but I was generally pretty good. He was not good academically.
Yeah.
Um and so he just kind of doesn't click with that. But uh I kind of digress. The reason I brought that up is because um we were talking about how just becoming a father really just completely changes how you see the world, where your priorities are, everything like that. So I'm curious, from your perspective, what that looks like.
Yeah, man. I mean, it's like there's few words to describe it. I mean, it's like you don't really like to start, you don't really know, like, yeah, you might, I love my wife. Like we've got a great
Hmm.
relationship, been together for 7 years now. But
Congrats.
thank you. Thank you. Yeah. But there's like one, it's really deepened our relationship because,
Hmm.
now everything that we've put in place, like as a couple, all the ups and downs we've gone on and all the experiences we've had, now we can impart like the foundation that we built together onto someone else. And it's like, dude, the love that I have for my daughter, like my kid, is like it's beyond anything that I could really express. Like, and
Hmm.
it really puts into perspective, like as a man too. And I know it's maybe subtle differences between having a boy or having a girl, but
Hmm.
really makes me think like I didn't have a rough upbringing, but I had, you know, there were a lot of family issues when I was growing up. My
Yeah.
parents got divorced, my brother's schizophrenic. I'm the oldest. I've got two sisters, and I love my family to death, and I still do, every one of them. But it was chaotic,
Hmm.
you know. And I learned a lot about what not to do through them. And now
Mm.
I'm seeing, like, especially for a girl, right? If a boy has a terrible relationship with his mom, that's very destructive.
Mm-hmm.
Versus, you know, versus like, yeah, it's bad to have a relationship with your dad. Maybe your dad hits you or yells at you or something like that. It's not as bad
Mm-hmm.
as if a boy has a bad relationship with his mom. And the same thing with,
Really?
I think personally,
Mm.
because and this is just a theory I have,
Mm-hmm.
it's reflected in the people he chooses to date later on in life. He looks for
Mm.
validation. He
So
looks
that's standard, yeah.
he looks for the mom that he never had. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and the same thing I think goes with girls and if they have a poor relationship with their father. And I
Mm-hmm.
just have seen that pattern reflected a lot in friends of mine and girls I've dated in the past and things like that. And it really, like, I know, like, she's gonna look to me as an example. And
Mm-hmm.
I have to set the example of, like, who a good man is, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's made me very aware of like my behaviors and my patterns and my flaws, my strengths. My wife and I joke, like, she's 4 months old right now, so we
Mm.
we both kind of have foul mouths sometimes. Like, oh, eventually we're gonna have to get better about. I don't want her first word to be, fuck or something like that, right? It's like things like that. You become really
Yeah.
aware, or like, if we're having an argument, it's like
Mm-hmm.
we're really good at moving past those. But okay, now we're thinking, like, there's someone else in the house. Like, she's gonna
Mm-hmm.
see, how do we have that conversation? How do we disagree without
Yeah.
it being something that, an environment like I grew up in where my parents
And
were screaming at each other all the time. Yeah,
but with that too, you also don't want to go to the other extreme where she never sees you argue or disagree about anything and then gets out in the
exactly.
real world and says, wait, hold up, this isn't what I thought it was.
Exactly.
So,
Exactly. And so it's really like, it's going to be really fun and really interesting and a challenge and a blessing at the same time to
mm-hmm.
to learn how to communicate those things to her.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and yeah, it's the best feeling in the world, man. Like,
Yeah.
and as someone who, like, my wife's more introverted, I like to talk. I'll just sit there, I'll just
Oh
rant
man.
days. Yeah, yeah, there we
Oh
go.
yeah.
And
Me and my girlfriend have a very similar relationship. So
yeah, go on rants, dude. I won't shut up. But it'll be fun, like the why phase, like when they get like 2 or 3 years old, and why is this
yeah.
blue? Why is this? Why that? Why this? It's gonna be a blast. And
Mm-hmm.
you know, I know it's like, I like, my wife's 27, I'm 32. We're still fairly young relatively to a lot of people having
Oh
kids,
yeah, in the grand scheme of things,
the grand
incredibly.
scheme of
Yeah.
things. But I just encourage everyone, like, build a family. There's nothing better. And everyone who says, like, oh, you're not going to sleep, you're not going to have time, you're not going to do this, it's not true. It's like, like,
Oh, but Joe, if you have a family you can't sleep around, dude, what's the point in
no,
that?
no, what's the point? God. Yeah, no,
Can't get hammered every Saturday for
the
fun
red pill guys are
to
down
cope with the
so.
pain of existence.
Yeah, it just, it really just, you fall to the level of, like, when you've got your routine and your habits and your responsibilities on point, it only adds a whole nother dimension of
Mm-hmm.
good things to your life. If you don't have those things on point, you're gonna learn very quickly that you need to have those things on point. But it's, yeah, it's great to
Yeah.
sum it up.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. Sounds like it. Yeah. And it's also one of those things. I'm thinking about this in the context of marriage because actually one of my housemates here is getting married very soon. Um, and he's, similar, about the same age as me, so very young dude. And I'm just kind of, turning over this question in my head, wanting to get to a position where I'm able to, propose to my girlfriend and everything.
Sure.
Um, and just thinking like as a single person you don't really have a point of reference for what marriage is like because you can approximate it in your head but
Yeah.
there's nothing that actually if I mean properly ordered you won't be cohabitating beforehand but even that is just like a shallow reflection of what it really is and so having a kid just takes that to a whole different level and that's not even getting into the biology of
Right.
the bond and everything like that so that's
And
amazing stuff man.
it's just so powerful. Like,
Yeah.
we weren't able. you become a part. It's like it's a partnership. My wife and
Mm-hmm.
I, we bought our house with money that we both saved together. And like everything we've done is like
Mm-hmm.
really been like very coordinated. And now it's a little bit, she's not working. She's a stay-at-home mom now. I'm the
Mm-hmm.
only one working. Changes the dynamic a little bit. Yeah, but it's good. It's good. It's like you
Oh
learn
yeah.
and you grow with that person. And
Mm-hmm.
it is it does, people are I think people are obviously like we dated for four
Mm-hmm.
years before we got married. In hindsight, probably should have pulled the trigger earlier, but it was always like, oh, well, we're renting this house. Like this job I have
Mm-hmm.
is great. It's like all those things.
Like we
But
said before we started, never perfect time.
never perfect time. Exactly. Exactly, man. But yeah, it's like, people who get married, like they live longer lives, they make more money,
Mm-hmm.
they have healthy, happy lives. Like it's an institution for a reason, and
Yeah.
yeah, it's the way a kid should be. It's the whole purpose is to have that foundation for a kid, man.
Yeah. Amazing, brother.
Been a
Yeah,
great
this has been
conversation.
an amazing conversation. It's been just a joy to have you on. I'm sure I'll want to be having you back at some time in the future because just based on our conversation, I'm sure we could dive deep on a bunch of other
Yeah,
topics as well.
let's do it, man. I'd love to talk more about like
100%.
marketing and business and writing and things like that too. So anytime,
Absolutely.
let me know. And
Yeah.
yeah, when it's out, let me know and I'll promote it a little bit and maybe take some clips and make some
Hmm.
content with it stuff.
Yeah, 100%. Before we get going here, so you've obviously people can find you on Instagram at Right and Left, and I'll link that in the show notes here. You mentioned you have a fiction project coming up. Is there anywhere people can find that, and is there anything else from you they can check out?
Yeah, so I have a Substack called it's just writeandlift.substack.com. Like you said earlier, I do keep my Instagram stuff more concise, but I do
Hmm.
longer essays there 1 or 2 times a week when I have time. So I'm planning eventually to launch like kind of a book club thing there as
Hmm.
well. Just, need to find the time to flesh that out. And then yeah, I'm working on a novel right now, almost done with it. So I don't want to
Very
say I'll have
nice.
that out, ideally I'll have it out by the end of the year. There's revisions and I'll have some test
Oh
copies
yeah.
out. Lots
Oh
of
yeah.
that. I want it to be something I'm really proud of, but
Hmm.
I really like the way that's turning out. And so I'll have a lot more information on that, maybe some excerpts from it on the Substack as well. And yeah, Instagram's my main platform. I have a Twitter handle, same thing, right and left, but I mostly just use Twitter to
Hmm.
shit post and network with people. So Instagram's the main platform that I use primarily.
Good stuff. All right. Well, thank you again, brother. And yeah, everyone, please go follow Joe, consume his content. He is, as I hope you've gathered from this conversation, pretty well spoken and reasonably intelligent. And so, yeah, so
Appreciate
it's
you.
just been an honor to have him on. But yeah, I highly recommend checking out his stuff. And if you don't agree with him on everything, great. I feel like that's kind of the point to some extent is
Yeah. And I
just
always engage with
promoting that conversation. Yeah,
always happy to have a conversation and talk about these things. So
good
yeah, man,
stuff.
it's been a pleasure. And yeah, take care of yourself, Gabe. We'll talk soon.
Absolutely. Thank you, brother. And that concludes episode 7 of the Operation Paragon podcast. I personally love this conversation, as you probably heard, and it was an honor to have Joe on. If you guys are interested in developing your mindset and learning more about the world, you should absolutely check him out at Right and Lift on Instagram. I'll, of course, have a link in the show notes. And as you heard, I personally enjoy his content. There's a ton of valuable information there, so I highly recommend at least checking him out. If you want to get in touch with me, you can DM Operation Paragon on Instagram or email operationparagonpodcast@gmail.com. Until next time, remember that greatness is within your reach.